Why, hello there. I'm your narrator, Zoe, and this is my series, Fear or Instinct, and you're listening to Book 1, Scrutiny. Within these words, you will meet malformed amalgamations from the pits of dread itself, so, obviously, this story has some disturbing themes. Listener discretion is advised. Prologue. Tyvek swishing, and the crunch of gravel underfoot felt especially loud because he knew what he was doing was wrong. Long ago, he'd been trained to simply do and not ask, but despite his best efforts, he'd always quietly observed, cataloged, and remembered. Little things other people would have long forgotten. He remembered the briefcase in his hand from one seemingly innocuous pickup maybe 10 years ago. Go to a waterside beach and wait. Someone would sit down next to him, say a code phrase. He didn't remember that bit anymore. But he did remember the case. Silver, locked, 4 blocky numbers on each side. Rather boring, really. Except he noticed a tight, hermetic seal along the edge. He never asked questions. He never saw it again. Until today. The immediately burned dossier had been very informative on his mission, laying out careful details, explaining his role and how a single mistake would mean his life, but not the failure of the mission. He groaned inwardly. Missions rarely gave him anxiety anymore, after 15 years, but this one was. No one was around, or they shouldn't have been around. This was a private residence, still being built. It stood alone at the end of a freshly laid gravel drive. The first workers should be arriving in a little over an hour, giving him the first slivers of dawn to work with. He didn't mind. Among his myriad of natural gifts, night vision was high on the list. These near-dawn conditions were essentially his bread and butter. The ease of it did not help to tear his mind away from the object of his mission. It was relatively simple: plant a weaponized mutation in the heart of the build, in the ill-advised basement, away from prying eyes. Set it up for a few men to die. Yet this was so wasteful. How many men worked on this project? That hadn't been included. He guessed 3 by the size of it. He climbed the short staircase on the house's deck, then boldly opened the front door. Unlocked, just for him. For this, an envelope had crossed hands, no doubt. The interior of the house was black. He paused a moment in the entry, blinking until his eyes fully adjusted. The house was framed and shingled, the interior still hollow. The plywood carried a strongly reminiscent odor. His father had built houses, a jovial man taken far too young. The stairs for the basement were right next to the door and led down to a nearly finished basement with marbled concrete walls and rustic polished overhead beams. There were stacks of dark tiles in one corner, a table laden with plans. It was so close to the stairs he nearly bumped it, with a lamp hooked on raw beams above. The room was quite dark, so he clicked on the lamp, bathing the room in a warm yellow glow. He glanced at the plans, curious to see what the house would have become had Tabitha not selected it for this. 2 levels above ground with 5 bedrooms, 4 bathrooms, and a lavish game room housed in the basement, complete with all of the best joys. It was an easy layout. He wished he'd thought of it for his own home. He had to stop. He was wandering way too much, and time was short. He didn't usually wander this much on missions, but this morning was different. He felt conflicted. He knew his briefcase contained a tightly corked vial. He knew that any contact with the powder within would cause a series of mutations, horrible ones that would rob the victim of their humanity and likely mean the death for anyone they came into contact with. And he'd worked for Zyko for nearly 15 years, and he had truly never believed them to be evil. He thought of them to be maybe a little morally gray, valuing logic maybe a little too much, but this, it just seemed risky. Why did they think they'd be able to contain the mutants after they changed? He didn't know enough to understand, which was why he wasn't supposed to ask questions. That wasn't his job. He wasn't the question guy. He was the do-it guy, the one that was careful and listened to directions, the one that got it done. Zyko and its myriads of checks and balances would never let something like this escape into the greater world. They had to have a better plan than that, and he was just simply not privy to it. Zyko would never let Tabitha do something terribly stupid. Right? He laid the briefcase carefully on the table. He wanted to put the dust on the tile, or maybe the plans. He was unsure of which would be the first thing they touched. There were no tools around. He expected they took those with them at the end of the day. He strolled the basement purposefully, looking for something that pulled his attention. And he found it. He spied a container of tile glue, then a push broom laying directly behind it. He understood that the dust needed to touch Bear's skin. It could be inhaled easily, as it was lightweight, which was why, along with the dossier, he'd also been provided a box of gloves, goggles, and a sturdy mask. He pulled these things from his bag and put them on. He moved to unlock the case, but again, his hand stopped. Was he... He was committing murder. And that begged the question, were there others? He thought about things he'd gone after on Zyko's command, considered the villains he'd faced, the monsters he'd seen them as, never as human. Never. How many had he killed? He thought about the bullet he'd fired into creatures vaguely human, bottles of strange liquid or powder or whatever he'd released into small spaces just like this. Many, he decided. He'd killed many by now, and he would probably kill many more. For Zyko. For his family. For the security that Zyko provided. Really, no one employed better doctors or provided better benefits to spouses and children. He opened the case using the numbers they provided, numbers he'd been well trained to never repeat. A thin beam of light built into the seamwork illuminated the insides. He swallowed. Well, it wasn't very big. Not longer than his pinky, nor wider than his thumb. He picked it up, carefully. Mary came to mind, her cheery smile and voluptuous mind. The babies she was carrying for him, tiny beings not yet formed. So he had to kill people. Who was he to complain? They were aimless people, with ideas. For Mary and his little beans, he would end all people. He carefully worked the cork out of the bottle. He sprinkled the dust across the glue and then the broom, and emptied the rest onto the already dusty floor. He found there was little difference between what he'd done and what was already there. Done. Easy as always. He corked the bottle and put it carefully back into the case, then walked back up the stairs, out of the house and down the gravel drive. It felt a lot easier now. The trunk of his car opened on his approach. He waved his hand above a small sensor, and he was sprayed with a generous amount of sanitizing liquid. Then he removed the gloves from the Tyvek suit. He tied them in a plastic bag. He set off the sanitizer again. Fresh gloves. He started stripping down the Tyvek suit when he heard gravel crunching behind him. He stopped. It wasn't even dawn yet. Why would anyone be driving his way? Had he set off some sort of alarm? He refused to rush. Taking off the goggles and his mask, he shoved those into another bag and zipped it all closed inside of another bag, which he pushed to the furthest back of his trunk. He had just enough time to toss the briefcase inside of its container and then set the sanitizer off a last time before the crunch of tires became a sweep of headlights. He shut the trunk and walked around the side of his car, glancing sideways at the vehicle approaching him. A man's voice came to him. "Can I help you?" No, I was lost, but I figured it out." He hoped the other would take the excuse and leave it at that, but instead he pried. "Where are you going?" For whatever reason, his mind went blank. It's down back the road a ways. I already figured it out. Thanks." He tried to get back into his car, but the man called, "Wait." He opened his truck door. It squeaked unpleasantly, a construction worker's dismal salary. The visage was, for a moment, his own father. The squeaking door and the man's tired gait, all him. Then he was a stranger again. "You don't sound like you're from around here, and It's about easy to get lost in the dark. The man was middle-aged, clean-shaven, and looked tired. His misty blue eyes carried the weight of early mornings bleeding into long nights. Rapidly, he searched his mind for the other roads he'd seen on the map. One came to mind. I'm going to 117 Oakvale Road. The paper map says I gotta go back about a mile and then up the paved road. I know this was the wrong one when I saw the gravel. I was just hoping for a better turnaround spot. He was saying too much and he knew it, but he couldn't get his voice to stop. The man smiled, friendly, trusting. He had no idea he was talking to his killer. That's right. It's about 2 miles back, though. Thanks. You betcha. Hey, where are you from, mister? It's a town in New Jersey called Scottsdale. Oh, the man's voice seemed disinterested. Well, it looks like you've gotten yourself back on the right track. You have a good day, all right? Yeah, thanks. The man flashed a big jovial grin and patted him hard on the arm, and stepped back, seemingly satisfied with their interaction. The agent got into his car and turned on the ignition. A moment later, he rumbled back down the road with the worker in his rear view. The other watched him drive away with a distant, frowning expression, like maybe he didn't fully believe their interaction, but maybe he felt he thwarted whatever the stranger was up to. The agent did not see the other shake his head and get back into his truck, nor did he see him pull onto the driveway or go directly down the stairs. He didn't even see the work lamps light up. But he knew they did, and knowing set a pit in his stomach. He knew this man was a father. Fathers worked harder, longer. He wondered what would happen to that one's family. It wasn't as though Zyko handed out severance pay to its victims. His victims. He swallowed and brought Mary back to his mind. She deserved a safe pregnancy. She deserved to be protected from these people. And he knew his loyalty brought that protection. He was not stupid. So he had to kill fathers and families. His family mattered more, did they not? He nodded to himself, breathing a sigh as the pit dissipated. He turned off the gravel drive and down a dark, swampy road, the kind where the trees bear in on either side, so close only a slim river of sky is visible through them. At the moment, it ran a crimson red. An Apocalypse Keepers production. Thank you so much for tuning into that episode. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I enjoyed recording it. And if you did enjoy it, why don't you run over to our Patreon and show a little patronage, yeah? I appreciate you, and I hope you have a wonderful day. Tune in next week for Chapter 1, Hannah.
A sale is a sale, even if it is to a scumbag like you.